Hello, and welcome to East-West Ghostwriter Library. I'm David Earle, and I'll be your host as we explore Doug Rogers and Stephen Wilson's eclectic brainchild. Doug Rogers met Stephen Wilson through a mutual friend, Jordan Rudess. I happen to know the phenomenal creative force that is Jordan, and whenever he says, "Look out for this person," people take notice. Stephen Wilson released albums with his band Porcupine Tree between the years 1993 and 2009. His production style made waves because he could go from eclectic, warped, delicate, and dirty to heavy, blasting, punchy, and pristine. To describe his sound in words is difficult, so I'm happy that we're going to explore some examples of this library together. Listening will best give the impression of Stephen's style. Stephen's also well known for his 5.1 surround mixes of progressive rock albums. I've heard them and believe that he's one of the true pioneers of the medium. The fact that he mixed most of them, if not all of them, in Logic makes me particularly happy. When Doug got a hold of Stephen, he was able to spirit him away to East-West for an epic collaboration. Doug's work is all over these productions. The attention to detail, playability, and curation of the sounds is pure Doug Rogers. Doug is always keen to find holes in the industry where there's a need for sounds. Since the 90s, Doug has been creating library after library of groundbreaking work, and in this one, and this might just be a personal observation, he sounds like he's having a blast. Ghostwriter is a companion to your productions, a silent partner coming to the table with all kinds of great one-of-a-kind sounds, ready to be messed with and placed into your productions. With around 63 gigabytes of 24-bit 44.1K samples, all created with care and abandon, you aren't going to get bored with these anytime soon. So let's see what makes this library tick. First things first, let's get into the browser. Under the browser, you'll notice that there are some folders, and then there are some individual instruments that are sitting outside the folders. The folders have all been organized very meticulously. If we go into something like acoustic guitar, you'll see that all of the different techniques for miking and producing the guitar have their own folder. And within the folder, you have all of the different articulations. The articulations for the instrument will have parity across each of these folders, so that it's very easy to switch between articulations and not feel like you're missing any articulation, like an up or a down or a round robin of any specific kind of articulation. So if we go down to something like EBow guitar, you'll notice that it has the same thing. Here it is with attack, here it is spacey, and here's just the EBow guitar, and you'll see that the articulations have parity across the folders. There are 6 different categories: guitar, bass, keys, miscellaneous, vocals, and drums. Let's check out the player. Inside the player, on the left-hand side, we have a very cool tape delay, the EP1 delay. You can adjust the flutter, the drive, the echo, repeats, and level of this awesome delay. You have a filter. On the right-hand side, you have an amp envelope. You have a really great amp simulator at the top, and the awesome convolution reverb, East-West convolution reverb with all of their hundreds of impulse responses. In the center, we have stereo spread, panning, volume, overall volume for the instrument. Below, channel sources. We can either say mono, stereo. We can choose mono from the left to the right and swap the left and right channels. You can choose the output of your DAW, whether it's 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, all the way up to 18, it looks like. On the left-hand side, we have our system settings. That's where you set your MIDI channel transposition and such. You can get your velocity settings and all that jazz as well. On the right-hand side, you have your articulations. These are all of the different sounds that are making up this particular instrument. The instrument I have up right now is a drum kit, so it has a lot of different articulations and samples loaded. In the mixer, we have an awesome mixer that has a channel for each instrument that's loaded. And if the instrument has potential multiple outputs, we click here to get the faders that mix that instrument. In this case, we have a drum kit, so we have all the different elements of the drum kit that we can mix together. We also have this effects section. This is particularly important inside Ghostwriter because these effects are what are being used to give Ghostwriter its really unique sound, as well as the player effects. We have an SSL channel strip. We have a amazing convolution reverb built in. And then we have the SSL bus compressor available as well. Our amp simulator's up here with all of the amp simulator settings. We also have Omicide, the most amazing multi-band distortion and saturation unit that's ever been made. Okay, now that we've been through all the main parts of Ghostwriter, let's have a listen to some of the sounds. I wanted to come up here to this acoustic guitar, and as you see, the acoustic guitar has a lot of different production techniques applied to it. DI means direct input, so the acoustic guitar is going directly into a console. As you hear, it's very dry. When we choose harp-like, the sound of the instrument changes dramatically. The way that these have been produced are a combination of what we have available to us within Play in terms of effects, and also the production techniques used to record and produce in the studio at East West, which has some of the most amazing vintage and modern gear available. So here's an acoustic guitar where we don't have any attack on it. As you see, the amp envelope has a higher attack rate. Here it is, spacey. Here it is with crystalline production, whatever that means. Beautiful stuff. If you have a MIDI controller, guitar MIDI controller, it works really well with this library. Here's a bari swell. So this is a baritone guitar. And you can hear how rich and harmonic these sounds are. They're definitely pushing the boundaries with these sounds. They have these upper harmonic things that they're intentionally dissonant. Really beautiful. Here's a sound going through a Leslie cabinet. And as you can see in the play engine, we've got key switches down below, which we can switch our articulation with. And then we have the playable area of the sound is in white. EBO. So this is a guitar which is using a magnetic resonator on it, which gives it this beautiful bowed sound, even though it's being used on an electric guitar. So in these instruments, a lot of the processing has been done for you, but you can, of course, go back in and mess with it. You can go into the mixer and all of the great effects that you have in Omicide to really make things as you can hear, these sounds, they're on the border between being sort of nostalgic and vintage and also being very modern. Here we have one that's nasal guitar sustained with vibrato. So that's almost like a Brian May type guitar. Here's one that has an octaver pedal on it. So these sounds instantaneously give you this environment to put the rest of your song on top of. Sigur guitar is also one of my favorites because it calls to Sigur Rós, which is one of my favorite Icelandic bands. Here's a nice Telecaster sound. And what I love is that even though you know it's going to be a Telecaster, it's going to be processed in a way that sounds like no other Telecaster on the planet. The basses tend to be really large, distorted, and pretty rude. A little bit edgy there, eh? The basses, especially in this library, show off how Ghostwriter can give you a real edge. I love the pick on that. When we start getting into the keyboards, Steven Wilson is apparently a big fan of the clavinet, which is a fretted instrument that's played with a keyboard where the string is being hit with a hammer on an anvil. Check this out. So using a combination of the effects that are built into Ghostwriter, it really gives it that sound. When we come down to the ambient version of that sound, now, the reason I included both of these is that the clavinet is usually thought of in funk music and things like that, and it's really being recontextualized within this library. Death piano is an example of another keyboard instrument that creates an entire environment that you can build your song on top of. So to me, that's reminiscent of Boards of Canada and that sort of style. Check out the bass frequencies in this sound. Not only does it have that real dirt and grit on top, but it has a really solid, punchy low end that if you put that in anything, it's going to cut right through. Keyboards are not the only thing that come under the knife when it comes to Doug Rogers and Steve Wilson. Check out this cello. Totally recontextualized. They also call back to some of the great bands. This one happens to sound a lot like Echoes by Pink Floyd. A lovely sound. Mellotron is known for being the progressive rock choir and string ensemble of choice from the 70s. But once again, these Mellotron strings sound like nothing else I've heard. Also, with these Mellotron strings, if you play around with the mod wheel, you end up with something that's more of a Leslie effect. The mod wheel is your friend in all of the East-West libraries. It'll allow you to get to aspects of the sound that you may not have known were there. Sometimes it's just a filter, but sometimes you'll get a whole new sample set being played with the same keys. Here's a warped piano. Yes, that used to be a piano. Same with that. When we get into pads, these are not pads that you think of in terms of synthesizer pads. These are being created from samples of instruments and kind of run together to make these beds of sound. Get to these bells, it sounds a lot like a gamelan. maybe a gamelan from outer space. This sound, again, calls to the great band Pink Floyd. When you think of the song Time, listen to this. That's amazing. It sounds like the guitar is 40 feet long. Along with guitar sounds and pads and keyboard sounds, we're also given a couple of vocal patches. Using a lot of processing, adding these into a production sound really interesting, and they don't just sound like a choir. In classic East-West style, the drum kits are punchy and insanely well recorded. The processing on these is super interesting, and I highly recommend that when you check out the drum kits, you definitely go through and check out all the different processing and production techniques that they used. I'm just going to show you a couple of them. So there's just a dry kit, right? So now we're given the reverb and the gated reverb are just really interesting, and everything's placed within the stereo field in a really strange way. Here's a taped up drum kit. So it's going to have no ring to it. Well, the ring that you hear is the reverb. These guys aren't afraid to use a spring reverb on a drum kit. So all of the elements of the kit are being mixed in a really interesting way. If we go in here and go into the effects, you can see that we've got a drum room, we've got some SSL channel strip going on, but a lot of the processing is not even an amp simulator that's built into the sound. So they ran it through something really interesting. They ran it through some amplifiers that they had on hand. It's not being processed by the internal processing systems in Ghostwriter. So that's really cool, because not only do you have the dry kits and you have some kits that you can run through the effects within Ghostwriter, but they have these ones that they're using these, boutique amps that they got that are very, very rare. The reamped kits are particularly fun. So there you go. That's Ghostwriter in a nutshell, and the kind of sounds that you'd be working with and the tones that you get from Ghostwriter. It's really eclectic and interesting and edgy and cool and vintage and modern. It's really an amazing set of sounds that you can work with. And when you get into the mixer and start messing with the Omicide, the 4-channel distortion saturation plugin, and also get into the amp simulator, the choices that you have with Ghostwriter are endless. So I hope you check it out and have a great time with it and explore and experiment, because that's really what this library is all about. Now, to hear this library all put together, I'd like to play a demo for you. Until our next cartoon, I'll see you later. Ciao.